because when I got started, the purchase contract was only 4 pages, and now the listing agreement is 8 pages. So these forms get longer and longer, usually as the result of lawsuits. So we're going to try to get through this in 1 hour. And in doing so, I'm not going to go in super great depth on a lot of this stuff. I mean, I could probably take each one of these pages and do a full hour on each page. We have an 8-day, 8-hour class, but we're going to kind of go over the basics. And if you have any questions, ask. Ideally, once the class is over, or pull me aside, or give me a call anytime, and we can get the question answered for you. Okay, so let's get started. Line number 1, owner/seller. Why is there owner and seller? Because that could be, more often than not, it's a homeowner, a name, Janie Clark, JP Cook, Marla Burns. Perhaps it's an LLC or a trust, right? An entity, okay? Line number 3, that's always going to be Realty One Group. Line number 4, sometimes, especially some of the bigger teams, we have a lead agent and a co-agent, okay? How's AZ? You guys have that, don't you? Hector? Yep. Ava? Who's guilty of that? Okay. You know, I better do the same thing. It's going to happen to me too here before I'm going to pick on you, and then I'm going to do it myself. Okay. Section number 2, premises. You've got property address, assessor number, and you've got legal description. So you need 2 of the 3 for it to be a valid contract. 2 of the 3 for it to be a valid contract. If you're selling land, maybe you're going to have an assessor number and a legal description. You're probably not going to have a property address. You need 2 of the 3. Lines 10 through 13. Why are there so many lines there? What do you think might go there?
Part of the legal description.
Yep. But the answer is yes. But the answer I was looking for is potentially there's multiple parcels. So maybe you're selling a parcel with a house on it, and the adjacent parcel is a separate parcel, but that's included too. Okay, so you can put multiple parcels on the same listing agreement. Okay, scrolling down.
At least be under the same assessor.
No, there'd be different assessor numbers too. Well, the assessor number it would be the parcel number. Different legal descriptions, different parcel numbers. Yep. So you can sell multiple parcels under the same listing agreement, is what I'd like you to take from that. Section 3, list price and term. So agreement. This is an irrevocable agreement. Seller cannot unilaterally cancel. So interesting, in the next couple of pages, we're going to see a section where the listing broker, listing agent, actually can unilaterally cancel, right? But this states that it's an irrevocable right for the listing broker to sell the home. Seller cannot unilaterally cancel. Line number 19, price. You need a price in there. And people say, well, of course you do. But sometimes we don't see a price in there. They say, an agent will say, we're going to decide on the price here in the next couple of weeks. It's not a valid listing agreement, and the compliance team is going to ask you to put a price in there. Okay, so make sure you have a price in line number 19. This back a little bit. Scroll down, keep up with our folks on Zoom. Okay. Line number 21, term. Of course, it needs a start date and an expiration date to be a valid contract. All rights and obligations of this agreement will automatically extend through the date of the actual closing. So if you have a listing agreement that expires on April the 1st, but you have a closing that happens on April the 10th, you need to modify or extend your listing agreement in order to get paid for that closing. That's the question, do you? No, of course not. No, because it's going to extend. Now, is it a good idea to maybe do that? I would say yes, because if for some reason the deal dies, who's the seller going to potentially be upset with, even though you didn't cause it? The listing agent. And if your listing is going to expire, or in this example has expired, I said April 1st with the closing on April 10th, are they likely to relist the home with you? Probably not. So I always encourage agents to guard against that happening by doing a listing contract addendum, modifying the expiration date, just in case the deal dies, more often than not caused by the buyer, more often than not caused because by them not being able to get their loan. So consider that as well, extending the listing agreement while you're in escrow.
Yes, like 10 days, 5 days, extended.
Oh, you can do it 5 to 10. The answer is either one. Yeah. But that, Janie, that reminds me of something I should mention. So about a year and a half ago, they changed the requirement on, sorry, Zoom people, got to keep up with you guys. They changed the requirement for how long residential listing employment agreements can be. Now you can have your listing agreement a maximum of 1 year, a maximum of 1 year, okay, when you represent the seller. Okay. So if you have it for a year and a half, the compliance team is going to ask you to do a listing contract addendum. That'll be a common theme here, which is the document used to modify listings. Okay, moving right along. 24, capacity. Owner or any party that owner designates on their behalf warrants that they have the legal capacity and full power to enter into this agreement. So who might the owner designate on their behalf? What would be an example of that? POA, exactly. Power of attorney. And by the way, the power of attorney is no longer valid once the person given the power of attorney has passed. Right? So if the homeowner dies, but their family member has a power of attorney, that power of attorney is only active, or only valid, I should say, enforceable, if that person is alive. So keep that in mind as well. Correct. Yeah. Yeah, they wouldn't be able to sign closing documents for it. With the number of transactions we do, it happens. I mean, just yesterday alone, I think I probably signed 40 CDIs for this office alone, 40 closings in 1 day for this. So we see it. Not super common, but we see it. Okay, 27, modifications. I think probably for the third time in this one page, I've mentioned this. Listing contract addendum is the form we use to modify this document, whether it be the compensation, the term, or anything else. Line 28 at the bottom, equal housing opportunity, states you cannot discriminate. Tells you what that the line 30 here, sexual orientation and gender identity are the two most recent additions to that. So let's go to page number 2. 2 of 8. 2 of 8. Compensation. At the top of page 2, we have the standard boilerplate language that you see in most every form that we have. You know it's important because it is bold and it is in all caps. Line 37, all funds must be in U.S. currency, so no Bitcoin. No Bitcoin. There is a company in California that actually convert Bitcoin to US dollars and send it to the title company here in Phoenix. So if that situation comes up, let me know and I'll walk you through that. Line 39. Line 39, retainer. Anybody here ever collect a retainer from a seller? Upfront retainer? No? Okay. So you've got the option to do that. We do see, again, with an office that does as much business as this office does, we do see it, but it's not super common. So let's just say $500 for purposes of this conversation. So the agent collects a upfront non-refundable retainer of $500 from the homeowner, and maybe that'll go towards some of the expenses, photography, or some of the other things that the listing agent may be doing. That check is made payable to Realty One Group. We treat it in our system as a rental referral. I know it's not a rental referral, but we treat it that way, taking out 10% of the compensation. And then we deduct that from the final transaction fee. Okay, that got a little bit too deep into that. But the point is, you can collect a retainer upfront if you want, made payable to Realty One Group. Line number 43, listing broker compensation. So for anybody who's been in the business for a long time, I know Janie falls into this category. There was a time when the listing agreement showed both the buyer listing side and buyer side compensation. That was back in the days when compensation was in MLS. No longer. So we have listing broker compensation only. for sales or for rentals. So it says if the sale or rental of the premises is made by the owner or through any other brokerage or otherwise, you're being paid. So that's one of the major differences behind the exclusive right listing employment agreement versus the exclusive agency. Thank you. Exclusive agency listing agreement. So in your document library, whether it be SkySlope Forms or Transaction Desk, or if you're on House AZ, they use Zip Forms. Is Zip Forms, Eva?
Yes.
Okay. You might see two listing agreements, the exclusive right and the exclusive agency. You always want the exclusive right, the ER, like emergency room. You want the ER. Okay. And the reason for that is you are paid regardless of who sells the home. With the exclusive agency, it's legal. You can use it. We won't kick it back. We'll let you use it, but you may not be paid if the seller sells the home on their own. Okay, moving right along. Line 48, unrepresented buyer. So if you have an unrepresented buyer, make sure you disclose it in the purchase contract and make sure you're using the unrepresented buyer disclosure. The unrepresented buyer disclosure. So generally, do you do more work as a listing agent if the buyer is unrepresented? Yep. Nod your head up and down. You sure do. So you have the opportunity to be compensated for that work. Okay, and we have an unrepresented buyer class and some of the challenges you might have with what we call implied agency. But again, we're just going to focus on what we got here. So you can have additional compensation if you have an unrepresented buyer. Moving along, line number 50, buyer broker owner does or does not authorize listing broker to communicate offer owner's willingness to potentially compensate prospective buyer brokers. Okay. So what does that mean? The seller is going to give you permission to notify other agents, in this case buyer's agents, whether or not they're willing to pay any compensation. I still get confused in my head, commission versus compensation. You probably heard me say it before. They removed the word commission from every form we have, and it's been replaced with the word compensation. But for 30 years, my head has said commission. So struggle with that. Has to do with the NAR lawsuit. Yeah. We can talk about that later. Yeah. That was one of the changes that came about from the NAR commission lawsuit that was settled August of 2024. One of several changes, another one of which is the requirement of the buyer broker agreement, another one of which is the removal from compensation in MLS. But so does or does not give you permission to notify the other agents if you're willing to pay compensation. So what I generally encourage agents to do is if the seller is willing to pay buyer side compensation, say, yeah, depending on the quality of the offer, right? In the old days being a year and a half ago, there was a set dollar amount in MLS. That's no longer the case. So would the seller be willing to pay more buyer side compensation if it's a great offer, maybe cash, maybe $10,000 above list price? You bet they would. Are they going to pay more if it's a lowball offer? Probably not. So I would stay away from telling the buyer's agent what the seller will pay and let them know it's based on the offer, based on the quality of the offer. Okay. Okay, moving right along to line number 57. Line number 57, rentals. So let's put a figure in there just for purpose of this conversation. Janie, what would you put in line 57 for rental compensation? And there's no wrong number. Just give me a number. 3%. Perfect. Okay, so when we put 3% in line 57, you are paid based on the gross rental amount. So let's say it was a $1,000 a month rental, okay, for easy numbers. And let's say it was a 12-month lease, right? Could be 24 or 36. But if it was $1,000 for 12 months, that gross rental income would be $12,000. And Janie said 3%. So your compensation is 3% of the gross rental income, in this case of $12,000, which would be a whopping $300. A whopping $300. Rentals don't pay a ton, do they? Mm-mm. They don't pay a ton. We had our awards event yesterday. Marla was at our awards event yesterday, and we have one agent in this office. He doesn't sell a lot of homes, but you don't need to with his volume. His low end homes are about 1.5 million, and he's got several 4, 5, 6, and a couple $7 million homes that he sold. So that's kind of neat. I was never I focused on the number of homes I sold. I never really sold, multi-million-dollar homes, but it's kind of cool to see that sometimes. Okay, moving along toward the bottom, unrepresented tenant. Okay, we're going to skip down to, hold on one second, Marla. Line number 70. Okay, Marla, go ahead. It's what Janie mentioned. It could be anything. It could be whatever you and the seller negotiate, or in this case, the landlord negotiate. We saw that number more when the landlord was also paying the tenant side compensation. Rarely do I see that number in here anymore. But again, if the landlord's willing to pay it, you can collect 10%. Yep. There's no, what's the word? Usury, Ron? Is that the word? Usury?
Usury?
Usury? Yeah.
Everybody.
Ron Kopis, our designated broker. Okay, we're on the bottom of page 2 of 8. Rental renewal or extension. So if you put a figure on line 71, you can continue to receive compensation if the tenant continues to renew their lease agreement. We have an agent in this office. I don't think so. There's several new things in here. Yeah, by the way, and the top right of page 1 is the most recent revision, September of 2025. So it's about 6 months old, but I think you're right. I don't think I've seen it before. So we have an agent in this Glendale office who every year I get their addendum. We are on addendum number, easy, addendum 1, addendum 2, addendum 26. Because the tenant, he represented the landlord, the tenant moved into the home in whatever the math is, 1999 or 2000. That daggone tenant's been there for 26 years. That paid the mortgage payment. You bet they did. Yep. And every year, this agent in the Glendale office receives a compensation check for the tenant renewing their lease. So that's kind of neat. Down at the bottom, 73, purchase by tenant. Purchase by tenant. So I always encourage agents when they list a rental to put a sales commission up on line number 46. Up on line number 46. And you say, well, why? This is a rental. That's the homeowner clearly told me they're only interested in renting. Why would I put a sales commission on there? Because you want to be paid if that tenant purchases the home. Okay. So if that tenant purchases the home, you have the opportunity to collect compensation. Let's flip the page over to page 3 of 8. Page 3 of 8. Line number 76, broker dispute. In the event of a dispute between the listing broker and and any other broker regarding payment of compensation, owner shall not revoke or seek to amend compensation previously offered. So it says you can't do it, but sellers do it all the time and we let them. So what would be an example of that? If the owner has an agreed upon compensation on the listing agreement, let's, for example, say, Janie, give me another example for listing side compensation. And if you say the same thing, that's okay. There you go. Thank you. That's right. Yep, absolutely. So it's 3% on the listing agreement. And then there are issues with the Keep our Zoom folks up to speed. There are issues with the home inspection, and they want to knock down your compensation. Well, this says they can't do it, right? But they do, and we often let them. But if you wanted to play hardball, technically you point this out and say, no, you can't. And it says here in writing that you can't. Okay. Line number 80, withdraw/canceled listing. If unilaterally canceled by the buyer, I just said earlier, seller can't unilaterally by the owner, not the buyer. Seller can't unilaterally cancel. They send cancellation notice. You can make the argument that it is canceled. However, if the listing agreement is unilaterally canceled, and rarely does it get that way, they get upset with the agent, they contact me, I talk with them, and generally we're able to mend things and continue on with the listing until it expires. But if they were to unilaterally cancel and it's not mutually canceled between the two parties, they sell the home usually on their own because they met a buyer from one of the showings. Compensation is technically still due. Now, is it due? Yeah. Is it legally due? Yeah. But you and I are not going to get the seller to take out an ink pen and scratch a check to Realty One Group. So you're going to have to go through court, and the likelihood of a judge approving that is probably pretty slim. And even if they do agree to it, collecting on it is a totally different thing. So what exists in theory and what exists in the real world are sometimes two different things. Okay. Moving on, line number 83, payment from escrow or rent. So broker, it says broker can be paid and is often paid almost every time through the title company. Can the seller write a check for compensation directly to the listing brokerage, writing a check to Realty One Group and not go through escrow? Yeah, they can. Absolutely. Rarely do we see that, but we can see that. That does happen. Again, with the number of transactions we do see that. Line number 88. After expiration. So this is what we call the tail clause. So you're paid if a person sees the home, the homeowner cancels with you, and that person comes back and purchases the home, unless that seller relists with another agent. Okay, so the tail clause was put in the contract to protect agents from what used to happen in the old days. In the old days, an agent's marketing would produce a buyer who'd come to see the home. Perhaps the buyer and the seller are they meet in the kitchen, and the homeowner sees that the listing agent is not around. Maybe they stepped out to return a phone call, whatever the case may be. The seller says to the buyer, hey, I'm going to cancel my agreement today with my listing agent. You come back tomorrow, contact me directly, and instead of paying the agent 3%, which is going to save me $25,000, I'll split that difference with you, and I'll give you $12,500 off the list price. So it protects agents from that happening, because that does happen. That does happen. Okay. That is the tail clause. 94. Keep our folks online on Zoom up to speed here. Failure to complete. Okay, so failure to complete. If the completion of the sale or rental is prevented by default of the owner or with consent of the owner, the entire sales compensation is due. Wow. So what does that mean? So if there's a seller breach of contract, so let's say we go under contract, so we're beyond the listing agreement, we actually have a purchase contract. If the purchase contract falls out of escrow because of breach of the seller or mutual cancellation by the seller, the full compensation is due. Again, good luck collecting on that. But it says it's due. If the contract dies because of breach of contract by the buyer, which is usually the case, more often than not, greater than 50% of the time, even if it's 51% of the time, more than 50% of the time, the full compensation is also due, or half of the earnest money that the buyer will forfeit, whatever is less. Full compensation or half of the earnest deposit, whatever is less. And usually what's less is half the earnest deposit. Okay. 98. Construction. If anything here is not within, anything in the listing agreement is not within the laws of the state of Arizona, the listing agreement will be modified at the minimum amount possible to bring it in compliance with laws in the state of Arizona. That's what that section says. Section 5, fixtures and personal property. Please, please, please have your folks, your sellers, read through that and be familiar with what this is, what this means. Okay. So we're gonna go to the next page. But make sure your homeowner, hold on one second, John. Make sure your seller's familiar with what section 5 includes for pictures. Go ahead, sir.
So the earnest money half goes to, is that new?
In the case that's not new, no. In the case of a buyer breach of contract where the buyer forfeits the earnest deposit, it's supposed to go 50% to the homeowner and 50% to the broker. But again, that's another example of it's supposed to, but it never does because we don't collect on it. We don't push on it. Legally, can you do it? Of course you can. But you may upset your seller too. And then there's a disadvantage to an upset seller contacting you every 5 minutes why the daggone home didn't sell. They're upset with you now because you took half the earnest money. Well, it says I can. Well, there's some things that you can do that maybe you shouldn't do, even though legally you can do. So no, that's not new. No.
Okay.
But we support our agents. If you have a deal where you've got the seller and there's a buyer breach of contract and the buyer forfeits their earnest money and you want half of it, you got my backing. I'll contact the escrow company as well and get you half of that. Okay. Again, rarely do we see it, but sometimes we do. Okay. We are on the top of page 4. We are moving along at a very good pace. Top of page 4, refrigerator, washer, dryer, and the above ground spa. Those are the 3 personal appliances that are considered personal property. So what about the garbage disposal, the dishwasher, or the built-in microwave? No, it's attached. Exactly. Those are appliances. They're attached. That's the right word. It fixed. Yep, exactly. Okay, 127, additional items. So what would be an example of some additional items that are personal property that you want included? Don't overthink it.
Maybe a TV that's attached to a wall.
Maybe a TV that's attached to the wall. Absolutely. The brackets, the mounting is already included, but the TV's not. But maybe you want the TV, so you put the TV down. Family room TV. Yeah, that's a great example. You're from from Colorado and you're walking through the hall from the kitchen down the hall to the bedrooms and you see a beautiful painting of the Rocky Mountains and you want that picture. That'd be another example. Things like that. Sure. Yep. Wait a minute. Fountain's already on here.
Value limit to what you just described as compared to something that would be a bill of sale?
Well, anything that is personal property, not excluding the washer, dryer, refrigerator, and above ground spa would be open to that. Yeah. Where you create a separate bill of sale. We actually have a bill of sale document in the SkySlope office / working docs that you would put that on, and sometimes it's of no value, even though it's clearly of value, and sometimes it is. And bill of sales are handled outside of escrow.
A great big picture, a great big mirror, and a fireplace that wasn't really part of the, it's a furniture fireplace.
Right. As long as it has no value. Can it go here? Ideally, it goes on the bill of sale, but as long as A, it has no value, B, the lender approves it. If the lender sees it on it, they might want it off. So as long as A, it's included with no additional value, and B, the lender approves it, yeah, you can put it on here. Okay. Not the listing agreement. You're talking about the purchase contract. Okay.
Putting stuff like that on the purchase. This is the list.
Right.
So here they have a giant TV and somebody scratches it and it gets destroyed. And then they, is there a problem with that?
There would be a problem with that. Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
Would it be better not to put it on there and then offer it?
Yeah, that's a good point. The way we're handling this question is almost as if we're representing the buyer here and what to be included. That's right. No, that's a good point. Yep. But there could be some additional personal property, for example. We're starting to spend too much time on this. We got a lot more to go, and not only 30 more minutes to do it. But an example of that would be some additional personal property that the homeowner is willing to get rid of that would be on the listing agreement, not on the purchase contract. We think of this as a purchase contract. Would be the seller's got a gun safe in the primary bedroom that is really heavy. They don't want to be bothered by getting it out of there. They've got a giant thick desk or pool table upstairs in the loft, and they don't want to get rid of it. That would be something you'd put here. Okay.
How about curtains? Like, when I sold my house, I removed all the curtains because I had
Sure.
custom made.
That's
But
right.
the rods were not attached. They were like on there and they had the balls at the end.
Okay.
But this says,
Says curtains and rods are attached.
Right. That's right. So if you want to leave,
when are we moving?
you want to remove them. Okay. Well, I think that's in the next section. It is section 134. Fixtures not included. So if you want to remove the curtains, and if you want to remove that ceiling fan in the family room because your great grandma gave that to you as a wedding gift and she has since passed, and you want to remove that ceiling fan, that would be an example of 134. So let's move on to section 6, which is agency. Line number 36, owner representation. It talks about what agency is, and that the listing broker will only represent the seller unless otherwise agreed to. And it goes on to say what those fiduciary duties are: loyalty, obedience, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting. And that's all outlined, of course, in the agency disclosure form, or what we sometimes refer to as the ready. Line 141, conduct of brokers. All brokers have the obligation to treat all parties fairly and treat all parties honestly. Okay, so in this case, you represent the seller, but you have a duty to treat the buyer fairly and honestly, even though you don't have the fiduciary duties to the buyer. So was anybody here at our January office meeting where I went over the Department of Real Estate rules changes? So the Department of Real Estate has some pretty significant rule changes that went into effect in December 13th. So what, 3 months ago? And one of which is the listing agent is now obligated to also disclose anything that they know about the home that perhaps the seller doesn't want to disclose, right? The listing agent's obligated to disclose that now, right? The seller may say, well, you better not, or I'll sue you. Let him sue you.
Yeah.
Let him sue you. You're never going to be penalized as an agent for doing the right thing. And it's the law. It's the law that a listing agent must disclose it. So there may be an outrageous example of that might be there's this small hole in the roof that is almost impossible to find. The general home inspector will look at the roof. It's so small that they're probably not going to see it. But man, it doesn't rain often here. But when it does, that water comes right through that. But nobody's ever going to see it. And I don't want to spend $10,000 to get it fixed. So I'm telling you, listing agent, it exists, but I don't want to tell the buyer that. Well, you know, you just told the listing agent. Now the listing agent needs to tell the buyer if the seller doesn't. Okay. So that's a new rule that went into effect. And you can make the argument that maybe it was an old rule that is now just being enforced. But the point is, the agents need to do that now as well. They're being held responsible for it as well. So that's conduct of a broker. Line 146, limited representation. Dual agency is legal in the state of Arizona as long as the listing broker / listing agent and the homeowner are comfortable with it, and it is agreed to in writing with, of course, the buyer. Line 150. What listing broker cannot disclose to clients under limited representation? So a lot of this is kind of common sense. So what can't you disclose? Well, it goes into several examples of what you can't disclose. So if you represent both the buyer and the seller, if you've got a buyer, you got a $500,000 listing, you've got a buyer in town from let's go to extremes. Let's say San Jose, let's say the Bay Area. and they say, wow, this $500,000 home is 1.5 million where I live. I'm glad to pay them 500,000. But I think I'm going to offer them 450. You can't go back to the seller who you also represent and say, hey, we're listed at 450. They're going to send an offer at they're going to accept 450. Okay, you can't disclose that. The flip side's also true. So if you have a $500,000 listing and the seller says, man, oh man, I got a job that I start in 2 weeks in Chicago. I got to get this home sold immediately. I know I'm listed for 500, but I'll accept 450. Well, if the buyer wants to offer 480, you can't tell them, even though you represent them, 480, the seller will accept 450. Save yourself 30 grand. Can't say that. So a lot of this is common sense. Okay. So moving along, 155, competing owners. This discloses to the seller that once your sign goes in the ground, it's certainly possible that a homeowner, the next door neighbor, homeowner down the street, around the corner, may see your sign and may want you to list their home as well, and you're able to do that. Okay, and you're able to do that. And of course, you and I know that, but sometimes homeowners don't. So this just reminds them. The very bottom, broker authority. Listing broker's role. That really says what the listing broker's role is not. The listing broker's role is not upkeep of the home, right? So if you want to go to the home and mop the floor or change a couple of light bulbs or replace that 9-volt battery and that smoke alarm that keeps beeping every 20 seconds, you can do it, but this is telling the homeowner that it's not your job, right? It's not your job to mow the lawn. It's not your job to make sure that the dumpsters are out on the curb every Tuesday morning before the garbage truck comes. Okay. Moving right along. Let's go to the top of page 5 of 8.
Can we do 161 real quick?
How quick is real quick?
Tell me why that's a valid line.
Owner agrees not to advertise or market the property in a manner without prior written permission from broker. I don't have a problem with them doing that, especially if you're using the ER. I've always been of the opinion, if they want to sit an open house on their own house 7 days a week, let them. You're still being paid. Okay? So I got no problem with that. Let's go to line 162. We're on the top of page 5. So this section explains what MLS is to the homeowner, and also states that that the home can appear in multiple MLSs. Okay, line 172. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on this section because this is definitely new. Owner's choice on marketing, line 172. So owner does or does not authorize listing broker to immediately market the property broadly to the general public. So immediately means the date that you have back on page 1 on line 21, whatever date you have that says that's when the listing agreement starts, is what this is referring to by immediately. So, and this part's important. We used to have what we called a coming soon addendum and a one exclusive addendum. Okay, that form is no longer. We removed that from SkySlope Office/Working Docs. It's no longer there. And it's been replaced with the AAR form called Owner's Delayed or Limited Marketing Addendum. Okay, that's one form. It's not Owner's Delayed or a different form called Limited Marketing. That's one form. The form is called Owner's Delayed or Limited Marketing Addendum. So if the homeowner is not going to allow you to promote the home to the public on the date that you show on line 21 of the listing agreement, you need to complete the AAR document called Owner's Delayed or Limited Marketing Addendum. So we'll take that and dissect that a little bit. So the owner's delayed. What's the delayed portion? Delayed, you check the delayed box. There's a delayed box and there's a limited box. If you check the delayed box means coming soon. Okay? AAR calls it delayed. MLS calls it coming soon. It's the same thing. Delayed is coming soon. Just AAR and MLS call it two different things. Okay. So on that same form, if you check the bottom box, which is the limited, okay, limited exposure, limited marketing, excuse me. That is what we used to consider the one exclusive, which means you're promoting the home to other Realty One Group agents and other Realty One Group agents only. You're not promoting it to the general public, nor are you promoting it to any other agent from any other brokerage other than agents with Realty One Group. So rarely do we see that. 9 times out of 10, when that form's used, the delayed box is checked, which is the coming soon. Okay. And anytime you promote the home to the public, according to NAR's clear compliance, clear cooperation policy, anytime you promote the home to the public, it needs to be in MLS in some status, either active or coming soon, within 1 business day. So sometimes you'll see agents do an open house on a Friday, knowing that they could do an open house Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and the home doesn't appear anywhere. So they and they alone can sell it. Okay, because it'd have to be in this example in MLS in either coming soon or active status by Monday. Once you promote the home to the public by open house, by yard sign, by newsletter, by any other means, it needs to be in MLS in one of 2 statuses, either active or coming soon within 1 business day. All right. Moving along. Line 176, owner, yes or no, is or is not allowing listing broker to place a for sale sign in the ground. It goes on to say if they agree to allow you to put a sign in the ground, it's you, the agent, that gets to determine if a rider is included with that sign or not. Line 180, owner does or does not authorize broker to take pictures. And it goes on to say owner is cautioned to protect the view of items that are in view. Right. So if you have any valuables, it's probably a good idea to hide those valuables before picture day comes and the world sees what you got in your home. Line 188. It also says those images are owned by the brokerage. Those images are owned by the brokerage. Line 188, lockbox or key safe. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody call it a key safe. Maybe I'll start calling it key safe.
Safe about.
That's right. Okay. Line 188, lockbox or key safe. Listing broker is or is not authorized to put a lockbox on the property. So it goes on to explain what a lockbox is, and it states that the broker agent MLS association is not responsible if somebody accesses the lockbox, gets a key to the home, accesses the home by way of the lockbox key, and injures themselves or steals something, right? Okay, so it states that and encourages the homeowner to make sure that they have insurance should that happen. Line 194, offers. Listing broker is or is not authorized to disclose the existence of offers. Maybe you got a hot property. It's been on the market for 1 day and you've already got 5 offers. It's a great home in a great location, and people always say seller's motivated. So, well, this seller actually is motivated. They priced it right where they got 5 offers on the very same day that the home's on the market. Seller give you permission to disclose that you have other offers and the dollar amount of those offers. Some agents are of the opinion that, if the seller gives me permission to say that we have 6 offers, the best one is $510,000. They give you written permission to do that. You're able to do that. Other agents have the belief system, and neither one's necessarily wrong. I don't want to play that game. I'm going to tell the buyer's agent, submit your highest and best. Yeah, but what is your current highest and best? I can't tell you. I'm going to tell you to submit your highest and best offer, and we're going to collect offers and make a decision Tuesday at noon. Okay, so either way you do that is fine. Okay, line 196. 196, subsequent purchase or lease offers. So it's built into the listing agreement here that the seller can accept backup offers. That flows right into line 200. Usually that first box of the 3 is checked, accept backup offers. contingent on the cancellation of the first offer. And then, of course, if you do that, and again, I always caution myself into going too deep onto these things, you would make sure that you use the additional clause addendum with the backup offer box checked, and the bottom of page 1 would say additional clause addendum. But in any event, line 200, usually we always see that first box, except backup offers checked. Second box, withhold verbal offers. So are you required as a licensee to present verbal offers? Yeah, you darn right you are. Yep. You're required to present any offer that you receive, whether it's on the AAR purchase contract or, whatever. Realestatepurchasecontracts.com. I don't even know if that exists, but if it does, and you get an offer on that, you're required to present it. What about verbal offers? You're required to present a verbal offer. Yes, you are, unless the seller instructs you no. If the seller says, I don't want to hear about verbal offers, you're not required to present them. If the seller says, I don't want you to present any offers, verbal or written, that's less than 500,000. Well, you don't present any offers less than 500,000. Rarely does that happen, but another example of it could. Okay. So moving along to the bottom, cancellation. Look at that word, probably what, the 7th or 8th word down there. Listing broker reserves the right to cancel this agreement unilaterally. So the listing broker can cancel it unilaterally for cause. So generally, what would be an example for cause? Well, more often than not, it is the seller who violates or wants you to violate something that has to do with federal fair housing.
Illegal intent.
That's right. Some type of illegal intent. That's spot on. Yep. Okay, let's change pages. Well, bottom of line 207, our owner's obligation, premises access. Owner agrees to allow the property to be shown during reasonable hours. And what are your lock boxes generally set for? Like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., something like that? I mean, you guys own lock boxes, and it's got a built-in security system where you can't even access the lock box that you own at 2 in the morning and sneak into the house, right? So I always just tell my homeowners that as well. So it gives them an extra security that nobody, even the person who owns it, can access it after my lock boxes were set to, I think, 8:30. Okay, line 209. 209. Security, insurance, showings, audio, and video. Broker is not responsible for loss of, can you tell this was written by Arizona Association of Realtors, and this was not written by homeowners? Broker is not responsible for loss or damage to personal or real property. It goes on to say that there are several third parties that will enter the home: appraisers, inspectors, brokers, agents, prospective buyers. Videos will be taken, photos will be taken. It goes on to say, hide your valuables, for the second or third time in this document. Hide your valuables and make sure you have insurance in case somebody gets injured, right? God forbid the home inspector falls off the roof. I mean, life happens. Does it ever? So, line 218, adverse information. Owner has disclosed to listing broker all material. What does material mean? That's right. Yep. And anything that helps to make them decide, anything that's important. Material, we can call the word important. If it's a material issue, it's an important issue. You make the argument everything's important. Well, some are a lot more important than others, right? You take the top 10 things, perhaps 1 and 2 are more important than the other 8 combined. Okay, so material means important. Latent defects. What's latent? Hidden. Hidden. That's right. There are certain things that the homeowner knows about the home that the buyer's not going to see. The home inspector's not going to see, but the homeowner knows only because they've lived in that home, for the last 25 years. They know certain things about that house that nobody else, including the inspector, will ever see. Okay. So, line 218, material latent defects regarding the home. So what are they referring to here? They're referring to the SPUDs. And if there's an update required on the SPUDs, So let's say we've already gone under contract. We've given the spuds to the buyer. By spuds for the new people, I mean seller property disclosure statement. And you need to modify or update the spuds. What form do we use to motivate or not motivate the spuds, but modify the spuds? You know what form we use? If we need to update, do we just create a new spuds? Not in this case, because then you'll have two spuds. Which one is right? The one that's most right. Well, which one is most right? No, you use the notice disclosure forms. You go in your document library, find the notice disclosure form, and the notice disclosure form is the form you use to update or make modifications to a seller property disclosure statement. Line 226, disclosures. Owner acknowledges that Arizona law requires owners to disclose important facts about the property. So, what if the homeowner, the buyer and the seller, agree to the SPUDS waiver form and they sign the document, the SPUDS waiver form that says, seller says, we're not going to do the SPUDS, and the buyer in writing agrees to it. Do you still have to disclose things? You sure do. But wait a minute, we signed the SPUDS waiver. Well, signing the SPUDS waiver is waiving the use of the form. It's not waiving the requirement to disclose. Okay, so disclosure is not a requirement created by the Arizona Association of Realtors. Disclosure is required by Arizona state law. And there's a lot of things buyer and seller can negotiate away. You can't negotiate away a state law. Okay, so you have to disclose. The seller has to disclose, even if they don't use the form.
Investors get away with, did not reside in this property, don't have any knowledge. That's kind of, I know the inspection discloses that, but discloses a lot of things. There's some things that.
That's right. There's some things they don't know. Yeah. And oftentimes they do get away with it because there truly is nothing. And then if there is something, it's relatively minor. Other times they don't. Right. And then that's right. That's right. And one of the things that he deals with is non-disclosure issues in lawsuits with and mediation and arbitration and ethics complaints and non-disclosure of items like that. So that does happen. Yeah. Yep. So how do they get away with it? Well, they get away with it if it's a non-issue or a very minor issue. They don't get away with it if it is an issue. It turns into a lawsuit, and he deals with a lot of those. Okay, so where were we? I think line number 229, number 1, affidavit of disclosure. Affidavit of disclosure. Okay, so if you're selling land, 5 or fewer parcels in an unincorporated area of the county, contact me and I'll walk you through the affidavit of disclosure. But if you're not selling land in an unincorporated part of the county, you're not going to deal with that. If you are, it's a form that needs to be notarized. And again, if that comes up, let me know. Number 2, disclosure of lead-based paint. If the home is built in 1976, is it required, lead-based paint disclosure? Yes. What about 1977? Okay, I got a home built in 1978. Is it required? The answer is no, not 1978. So if the lead-based paint disclosure is required if it's built before 78, which means 77 or sooner. So not if it's built in 78. So this is 2026. It's been 48 years since lead has been removed from paint. So at this point, I'm sure that the walls have been painted multiple times with non-lead-based paint that will encapsulate any lead that may have been in the paint from 1976, but it's still an item that we need to disclose. And we need to disclose that. We mentioned state law a minute ago. That's federal law. That's federal law. Line or number 3, domestic water well addendum. So again, if you're selling land, well, not necessarily land, it could be a manufactured home, Could be any home that has there's a well addendum that's going to be included. Let me know and I'll walk you through that. Number 4, Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act, FIRPTA. This is not a FIRPTA class. We have classes. There are 3-hour CE classes on this topic alone. For purposes of this class, what I want to leave you with is when you go under contract, you open escrow, the title company is going to ask for an identity statement from the seller. It's going to ask for the social security number or some type of tax identification number. More often than not, that means social security number. If they don't have it or they don't want to provide it, the title company is required, again, by law, to report it as FIRPTA. Okay, and there's some withholdings there and whatnot. So it talks about foreign persons and it goes into describing what the foreign person may be. So moving on to number 5, HOA addendum. So if the home is in a community that has an HOA, make sure you as the listing agent, because we're covering this from the listing side, as we're talking about the listing agreement, make sure you do the HOA addendum and you upload it to the docs tab in SkySlope. It's a 3-page document. Resist the urge as the listing agent to complete page 3. Only complete page 1 of the 3-page listing agreement. And there's some stuff on page 3 that you're going to prefer certain boxes are checked and you're going to feel like you want to check those boxes ahead of time. Page 3 is for the buyer to complete. Yeah, and the buyer's name comes on the top of page 3. So what I want to leave you with is page 1 is filled out by the seller. Page 2 is what I call a neutral page, and page 3 is filled out by the buyer. And then at the bottom of page 3, it's agreed to by the seller. Okay, number 6, insurance claims history. Insurance claims history. So you're required as a seller to provide an insurance claims history report to the buyer for the last 5 years, or if you own the home for fewer than 5 years, however long you've owned the home. Okay. We used to call it a CLUE, right? Comprehensive Loss Underwriter Exchange, but the CLUE's been removed, so now it's just called Insurance Claims History Report. Number 7, residential lease agreement. So if the home is currently occupied by a tenant, the homeowner, who you're listing the home by use of the listing agreement that we're talking about today, agrees to give the buyer a copy of the lease agreement. Agrees to give the buyer a copy of the lease agreement. Number 8, residential lease owner's property disclosure statement. That's what's called the rental SPUDs. And not a lot of people know that the rental SPUDs exist. We know the SPUDs always used with a sale. Well, if you did use this document as a listing agreement for a lease, there's actually rental SPUDs too. So why don't we talk a lot about it? Well, we don't talk a lot about it because it's not required. It's encouraged that the landlord does a rental SPUDs and gives to the tenant, but it's not required. With sales, it's required. It's in the purchase contract that the seller will give the buyer a SPUDs. In the lease agreement, it's not in there. There's no mention of the rental SPUDs in the lease agreement, but I think it's a good idea. Okay. Some of you may be hearing about that for the first time today, the rental SPUDs. Number 9 is what we always know, the seller property disclosure statement for sales, uploaded to the Documents tab in MLS. Number 10, solar addendum. Seller acknowledging that there is a solar addendum, and we got a new solar addendum just a couple months ago. Okay, so read that over. Familiarize yourself with the solar addendum. Perhaps we'll have a class on the solar addendum. Okay, we are on the top of page 7. Doing pretty good on time. Top of page 7, just 2 pages left. Recommendations. So if listing broker recommends, a contractor, escrow company, title company, pest control service, appraiser, lender, home inspection company, or home warranty company, or any other person or entity to the owner for any purpose, such recommendations shall be independently investigated and evaluated by the owner. So what I always encourage agents do is The most common example of this would be home inspectors. Buyer will say, and we're talking about from the listing side, but as an example, because it's the most common, you give the buyer at least 3, ideally 4 different home inspectors, letting them know that they could pick anyone they want. And they don't have to pick anybody that's on this list. They could do their own Google search for home inspectors who work 85308 or in the Glendale area or Phoenix or wherever, and they can work with anybody they like. Okay. Also, the ABA, affiliated business arrangement. Man, I don't want to go too deep into this, but this has been a hot topic internally for the last couple of weeks that we haven't really gone public to the agents yet. But one of those changes the Department of Real Estate has is the delivery of the ABA, the affiliated business arrangement, before the offer is submitted. And right now, when I say, wait, how can they possibly do that? It's in the next 10 days or so, you're going to get a couple emails about this from me, and in the next office meeting that we don't have scheduled at the current moment, but we'll have that scheduled sometime soon. That's going to be probably the primary topic of discussion, is delivery of the ABA from the listing agent to the buyer's agent prior to the offer being written, to be in compliance with the new Department of Real Estate rules. That's all I want to talk about that. Well, that's one. Yeah, but the Department of Real Estate does not consider that delivery. So we can't do that. Can't do that. That's not considered delivery. Okay. And the HOA addendum that I told you to upload to the documents tab, and the SPUDs that I told you to upload to documents tab, technically isn't delivery either. But it becomes acceptable delivery when the buyer signs it and sends it to you. They wouldn't be able to sign it and send it to you had they not received it. And they received it, therefore it was delivered. So that's right. And the ABA doesn't have the buyer's signature on it. Yeah. It's just delivery. It doesn't require the buyer's signature. Okay. Line 265, indemnification. Well, that's a big word. What the heck does that mean? Indemnification. Owner hereby expressly releases, hold harmless, and indemnifies listing broker. So that basically means seller agrees to pay the legal fees of the listing broker if we get sued because as a result of the homeowner doing something or saying something, or perhaps not doing something, not disclosing something. And as a result, they get sued, and we do too, because the seller didn't disclose something, and they throw the brokerage into the lawsuit as well. Okay, that's basically indemnification in a nutshell. Line or section 9, remedies, that talks about dispute resolution, talks about mediation and arbitration. Let's go down to line 287, attorney's fees and court costs. The prevailing party agrees to pay the court costs and attorney's fees to the other side. Additional terms and conditions. So on a listing agreement, what would we see on a listing agreement for additional terms and conditions? What would be an example?
Listing agent is related to seller.
Yes, that's a big one. Yeah. Listing agent is related to seller. That would be one. Another one would be owner agent. You'd use the owner agent addendum, but you would also put it in the listing agreement, owner agent. Another one we would see is maybe you do a full year listing agreement, because we talked earlier, employment agreements can't be greater than 1 year. Employment agreements to sell, interestingly enough, that what I just said does not apply for buyer broker employment agreements. Okay, and why that is a 10-minute explanation. So just know that for listing agreements, when you represent the seller, can't be greater than a year. For buyer broker agreements, it actually can be. Okay. So another example of what we might see in additional terms and conditions would be kind of along that line of thinking is you take a 1-year listing agreement and you put in the additional term section, seller can unilaterally cancel if they choose after 90 days or after 6 months, right? The homeowner, the seller took the longer listing because they don't want to redo paperwork or redo a listing contract addendum to modify the term. They take a full year, but in the additional terms, they give the homeowner the option to cancel within 6 months if they want. That might be another example of what you'd see there. Okay, moving right along to line 302. Assignment. This is kind of a goofy one. Neither listing broker nor owner may assign any rights or obligations pursuant to this agreement without prior written consent of the other. So what in the heck does that mean? The best I can make out of that is you never see really the owner assign. Now you do perhaps with a sale where then we get involved with wholesalers. So I'm not going to go down that road. That's basically stating that the brokerage will not assign the listing to another brokerage, right? But internally, can the designated broker, Ron Kopis, legally, can they take your listing away from Marla and give it to Paul? Yeah, legally they can. Now they're going to really upset Marla, and that's not good, but legally they can do that. So we're basically stating that we're not going to do that. Okay, that's kind of a goofy one. Line 304, Arizona law. Obviously, that the contract is based on Arizona law and not Michigan law. Line 305, notice of delivery. These are the different options that you have to deliver a document to another party. In the vast majority of time, it's number 2, sent via, or excuse me, not number 2, number 3, sent via electronic mail. So email, but you have the option of hand deliver. You have the option of fax. When's the last time anybody here sent a fax? But that's still an available option. You did?
Doctor's office.
Doctor's office. Okay, well, that's an example of it. Yeah, that would be an example. Overnight courier or a U.S. mail. Okay, so you notice upload to MLS docs tab is not one of the acceptable forms of delivery. But again, we turned it into an acceptable form if the buyer actually signs it and communicates that signature back. Okay. Line 310, days, calendar days. 10 days is 10 calendar days. It's not 10 business days. Line 301, copy parts and fax copies and counterparts. So the docs can be signed in counterpart, with the exception of one document. What is the only document that cannot be signed in counterpart? And until fairly recently, within the last couple of years, it could not be signed with electronic. It could not be signed via DocuSign. It had to be signed with a real ink pen. Not anymore. You can sign it on DocuSign, but it's the only form that cannot be signed in counterpart. It's the lead-based paint disclosure. The lead-based paint disclosure, the federal form, the lead-based paint disclosure, federal requirement. Okay, line 313. This listing agreement is the entire agreement between the broker and the homeowner. We will not rely on anything verbal, any verbal agreements. It's got to be in writing, and it goes on to use or state once again, we can modify it by use of written modification agreement, which would be the listing contract addendum for the 10th time. Okay, scrolling down to owner. What could I possibly have to say here? So line 320. Line 320 says owner or authorized representative. And again, we established that might be a power of attorney. Okay, now make sure we sign these correctly. And I've got a form called Who Can Sign? And it breaks down if it's an LLC, this is how you sign. If it's a trust, this is how you sign. If it's a power of attorney, this is how you sign. Okay, and if you don't have that form, let me know, and I'll send that to you via email. And also remind me that buyer broker, because I'm going to forget if you don't remind me after class. Okay. Section 12, listing broker, line 325. What do we put on there? Agent is a member of blank association / board of realtors. Nope, but that's good. We serve, exactly. We serve. Yep, we serve. And that way, if somebody wants to file an ethics complaint against you, they'll know who to contact. Okay. And then very bottom here, we leave that alone. That's for our compliance team for broker use only. And 1 hour and 15 minutes, we are done with the listing agreement. Congratulations.
Hey,
Yay, thank you.
Good job.
There, Marlon, give it up, Marla. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Zoom folks. Unmute yourself if you have any questions or put it in the chat. There's the chat. Kevin says hello. Can you scroll the document down? Yes, I apologize, Sabrina. I apologize. Can't see the below items. That's the case. I apologize. Hope you got some value. That was back at 10:08. Any other questions from the folks on Zoom? If so, please unmute yourself. No? Going once? Going twice? Okay, guys, that's it. Thank you for attending. And we have our next class next Thursday. Next class next Thursday at 10 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you.